I started from building AI solutions in healthcare, and I still build and research AI solutions in healthcare. But there's a policy and regulatory gap that I was interested in, and then had the opportunity of participating and contributing to. So more steadily, I work with United Nations. So this is the ITU, International Telecommunication Union, as well as World Health Organization. So there's a focus group that is created called AI for Health, and that is to UN agency. And so the focus is just AI in health, being able to at least close off that regulatory gap as well as just standards from a governmental point of view. So yeah, I'm the lead for the topic group on AI for radiology. So what that means is that I work with a team of experts across the world, including people from my own startup, Nino Health, but as well as people from different background, academia, government, industry. And what we do is that we are trying to identify certain standards to guide the space of AI and radiology. So we have all these people come in, we share ideas and everything. So it's very much a very powerful multilateral work. It's tough, it's but then it's very, very much engaging and it exposes you a lot to how much work is being done by other people. Prior to COVID-19, the good thing we did actually was that we held meetings every 2 months somewhere in the world. I mean, apart from the fact that it was fun to get to travel to some parts of the world every 2 months, but then it was also really interesting because when you are in AI, you hear about the usual places, US, China, but you don't hear about the fact that if you go to South America like this, Brazil, there's a lot going on in AI. We wouldn't usually hear about that. So when you travel to these countries and then we engage their AI as well as their policy regulators and then the government space, you learn so much about new ecosystems that might not necessarily get the publicity like others. So that has been very rewarding and just kind of broadening each of us our horizon. But outside of that, periodically I work with other intergovernmental organizations as well as governmental organizations. So I've worked with African Union, African Caribbean Pacific Group of States. Usually, this is in a way where I serve like a resource person, and then we will come up with certain recommendations for government. So we did this for ACP. We did something last year, December. This was a government and head of states summit, and we're tasked with coming up with recommendations that would then be presented before governments across about 80 different countries. And you had the presidents there and everything. It was really interesting. And then with the African Union, actually, there's a document that we worked on some months ago. And this is a very detailed document that is mapping AI and kind of looking at AI strategy for Africa as a continent and certain ideas, working on certain regulatory recommendations. What should we not do? What policies should be in place? Which is interesting because a lot of people might not actually know that African Union has something like that going on. People assume that they are not doing anything, but this is a very detailed document that we spend months working on. So once it's out, people are actually going to be quite impressed about it. So yeah, working in different parts of the world as far as regulations, policies, and standards. I've seen quite a number of stuff that made me quite happy, and I've seen a number of stuff that made me not so quite happy. So on one hand, it's AI has played a lot of role. I think a lot of the vaccine and then even medicine companies or those who had the chance of working on some of this for COVID-19 has testified that AI has helped, especially narrowing down the search in the beginning. And so that has been promising. There are a lot of things. So I think what's the name? We are just wrapping up with a certain hackathon that we run that the first part had to do with developing AI solution to detect COVID-19 related damages to the chest. And the second one looked at the fact that in places like South Africa, tuberculosis is still a big deal. And so being able to also detect that, and then in the long term, being able to clearly tell if a patient has COVID-19 or is tuberculosis or a combination of both. So these are some of the solutions that came out. A lot of people work on assessment platform, which is really interesting. A lot of government bought into it. Ethiopia, for example, I remember a friend, his name is Michael, who they kind of set up this whole unit where developers, Ethiopian developers basically came together to provide open source solutions for government, and they did that with government. That was exciting. Just seeing how much, so digital transformation on one hand, but then data-driven approach to government has also been interesting. Like the fact that dashboards became a commonplace, that on a daily basis, people wake up and they check the numbers and is it going too high? Is it dropping off? And then the government is responding to those numbers. It's been beautiful seeing that. It's unfortunate it took COVID-19 to drive this conversation, but it has been effective. But then on the other hand, there are certain things that we jumped the gun on, like people talking about initially where a paper was claiming AI could detect COVID-19 from chest X-rays. So it's one thing to detect COVID-19 related damages, it's another thing to claim to detect COVID-19 from chest X-rays. So one lesson also is that regardless of how much a problem exists and how much we want to solve it, taking your time going through the right benchmarking assessment is always important, especially when you're dealing with human life. So a lot of lessons to be learned. I think a lot of, without a doubt, a lot of the effects of COVID-19, the positive ones and even the negative ones, are going to last for quite a long time, as opposed to whether we'll maintain the good ones and kind of work away the bad ones depend on a lot of factors. So I think the interesting thing is that healthcare in a lot of ecosystem kind of has a governmental barrier, or let me not use the word barrier, unlike a lot of other sectors. So we have the privilege of working in agriculture as well. You can build a solution and take it to the farm and just go use it. No one is going to prevent you from doing that for the most part. In healthcare, you can't really do that. You have to go through a lot of challenges, barriers. And in that sense, if the regulatory barrier is very, holds you back, then it limits innovation. So a lot of innovators will just stay away from healthcare entirely. So I think one good thing about this is that it got a lot of developers excited about healthcare, that, hey, you can actually develop solutions and they might see the light of day. On the other hand, it also convinced governments that think anything is possible, and these digital solutions might actually be the solution to a lot of our problems. So being able to harness that would ensure that we don't forget the lessons that we've learned, and then the solutions that come out of this would then be used as basis for more and more solutions. So I think, yes, that's just right about it. But then, yes, or from a government point of view, they really need to make the ecosystem more friendly to innovators, and the innovators need to be respectful of just the kind of scientific rigor that exists in medical science, that you can't just skip around, because one wrong mistake will literally cost lives. So keeping this in mind will be very important. Yeah.
Darlington, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too.